Queries. When you have a large Active Directory database with lots of users, it can be a real challenge to make changes to those accounts simultaneously. Even identifying which accounts need to be changed presents a similar challenge. I mean, can you imagine having 10,000 user accounts all with different settings, and then you've got to locate every single account that has the property of password never expires set, and then you've got to uncheck that box on every single account? Well, have you got a weekend or two free? Well, with the query feature in Active Directory users and computers, you don't need a free weekend. In fact, you won't even need a free couple of hours. Finding out this sort of information is exactly what the query feature was designed for. Well, enough talking about it. Let's go and open Active Directory users and computers and take a look. So we'll click on Start, Administrative Tools, and we'll launch Active Directory users and computers. Over here on the left-hand side of our MMC, we can see Saved Queries. Now in the right-hand side, you'll notice that we currently don't have anything to show because we don't have any saved queries, but we can certainly fix that. So we'll right-click on our saved queries and we'll select New Query. Now the first thing we need to do is give our new query a name, so I'm going to call this one No Expired Passwords. Now we can also supply a description of our query, and I think that's a good idea so you can easily identify later exactly what this query does. So I'm just going to call this one Searches for Passwords That Do Not Expire. Now you can see here that the query root is set to our domain root, and this just means that our query will run against every OU in our domain. So to change this to just search within a particular OU, we can click the Browse button and then select the appropriate OU that we wish to run our query against. Now the next thing we need to do is to define a query. So we'll click on Define Query, and this will pop up the Find Common Queries dialog box. Now here we have so many options that it's impossible to go through all of them. We'll just touch on a few. Firstly, in our example, we need to locate all of the accounts that have the Password Never Expires box checked. Now this query is pretty simple. All we need to do is check non-expiring passwords and select OK. But let's narrow down the search a bit. Let's find all accounts that start with the letter S that also have non-expiring passwords. So here we can define the variables of our query. And up here we can define our variables of our query. Now we want to catch all accounts that start with the letter S. So under the Name drop-down box we'll select Starts With. And in the field to the right we'll simply type in the letter S. Now we'll click on OK. And we can see the results of our query have been placed here in the query string box. Now when we click OK, our query will run. Now here we can see the results of our query. Now these accounts here all have non-expiring passwords and of course also start with the letter S. But let's say now we want to change all of these accounts so that the box is no longer checked. Now this is where all of the magic happens. You see, finding these accounts was half the battle, and in Windows 2000 Server you could also use a query feature to find these accounts, but manipulating all of these accounts in one go is an entirely different battle in itself. Now this is something new with Windows 2003. We can edit the properties of multiple accounts using our saved queries. So we can simply select the first account and we can hold down Shift to select all items in between. Alternatively, you can just hold down Control and click to select multiple accounts. And once you've selected the accounts you wish to change, simply right-click on any of the selected accounts and choose Properties. Now this brings up the Properties on Multiple Objects dialog box. Now on these tabs, we can change the contact, locations, profiles, company details, and so on. On the Account tab, we have the options relating specifically to the account options, UPN suffixes, logon hours, and of course logon restrictions. Now note that down here under account options that we have two sets of checkboxes. Now if we want to apply changes to any of our existing settings, we must first check the left-hand side box. Now in our case, we've searched for accounts that have the Password Never Expires box checked. So we place a check in the left-hand Password Never Expires box. Now let's say we want to add a check in the User Must Change Password at Next Logon box. Now to do this, we first have to check the left-hand box. Then the greyed out box on the right-hand side is then enabled. So because we want to add this property to our user accounts, we must then place a check in the right hand box. Alright, that's done, so we'll click on OK. Now a word of warning here. You don't get a confirmation message telling you that your change worked and was applied. But trust me when I say this, no news is good news. If you don't see any messages, then everything worked well. If you see a message, then you made a mistake. So we'll verify this by right-clicking on, say, Superman's account. We'll select Properties and go to his Account tab. Now here we can see that User must change password at next logon box is now checked. So we'll cancel this now and we'll go and select both of our accounts again. Well, we'll right-click, we'll select Properties, which of course brings up the Properties on Multiple Objects box again, and we'll go back to our Account tab. Now this time, we'll make a change which will result in an error. Alright, now we know that currently User must change password at next logon box is enabled on these two accounts, and we know that because we just said it that way a moment ago. So this time, let's add a check in Password Never Expires box on the left hand side and again on the right hand side without touching any of our existing settings. Now, the more astute members watching this video would probably realise that you can't have Password Never Expires setting when you have a User Must Change Password at next logon setting, as they contradict each other. So this surely will produce an error. So we'll click on OK, and here we can see we do get an error telling us that these options conflict. And you can highlight a user account in this window and select Properties from this dialog box to verify this. Now we'll click Cancel, and at the top of this box here you can see if any changes were applied to these accounts and on which tabs the user properties were affected. Now take note here that this message can be a little misleading. We can see here that changes to the General tab were successfully applied, but we never made any changes to anything on the General tab. The Multiple Properties utility just applies changes in the tabs from order from left to right. And if there aren't any changes, it doesn't actually make any changes to the selected accounts. So bear this in mind before you start wondering what on earth has just been done. Now at the bottom here, we can see any changes that have not yet been applied. So any tab appearing after an error was encountered will be listed here. Now if we click Close, the Multiple Properties box will stay open so we can fix any errors and then rerun the changes. Alright, well let's go back and take a further look at what sort of queries we have. We can see here our no expired password has been saved. But this time, instead of creating a new query, we'll right click on our existing query and select Edit. Now we'll click on Define Query, and let's talk about some of the options that we have available to us. Now in the Find drop-down box, you'll see that we've got quite a few options. We could choose to run a query against users, contacts and groups, computers, printers, shared folders, OUs, RIS servers or RIS clients. So for example, if we were to choose printers, we could search for all printers that have a certain name or description or have certain features, such as the ability to print in colour, or perhaps use A6 paper. Now on the Advanced tab, if we click the Field button, we have a vast amount of options here such as resolution or share name, or even how fast the printer is. Alternatively, if these queries aren't custom enough, we can create a custom query of our own by selecting the drop-down box and choosing Custom Search. Again, if we choose Field, we can choose from any of the predefined fields that are supplied, or we can choose the Advanced tab and enter in our own LDAP query. So as you can see, there's a huge amount of possibilities here, and I'm certain you'll find what it is that you're looking for. The power of this tool is amazing, and I thoroughly recommend you take a good long look at it. Now before we finish up here, I just want to touch on a few of the other options that you have. Now all queries are automatically saved here by default. You don't need to manually save them. But if you've created a lot of queries, you can also create folders here to help you organize them. Simply right click on Saved Queries and select New Folder. Then we'll just give this folder a name, and then you can either right click on the folder and create a new subfolder if you like, or simply create a new query directly inside this folder. Now you can also drag and drop queries inside folders, which is kind of nice. And finally, if you right click on a saved query, you can choose to export the query definition, and this will export it out to an XML file. So just simply give it a name and click on Save, and your query is exported. Now if you do happen to want to import a saved query, we can simply right click on our folder and select Import Query Definition, and then we can select our query from there. Now as I mentioned, this is a really useful and powerful tool. I really recommend that you do yourself a big favour and spend some time coming to grips with what it can do. You'll find that this tool is a major time saver, so maybe, just maybe, you'll be able to find yourself having a lunch break sometime in the future.